In the entire history of our country, there have only been 16 Native Americans elected to the United States Congress. In 1907, in the newly formed state of Oklahoma, one of them was Chickasaw. Charles Carter's service to Native Americans everywhere earned his place among Chickasaw Leaders and Legacies. Charles "Charlie" Carter was born at Boggy Depot, Indian Territory, in 1868. Founded in 1837, Boggy Depot served as the first Chickasaw agency in the West and served as a depot for the Chickasaw and Choctaw Nations as they arrived in Indian Territory.
That in itself is a historic place for Chickasaws and Choctaws in southern Oklahoma.
His father, Benjamin Carter, Cherokee, served in the Civil War and was also Attorney General and a district judge. His mother, Serena Guy, Chickasaw, was sister to William Malcolm Guy, a Chickasaw governor in the late 19th century. As with many Chickasaws who rose to political prominence in that era, education was an important part of his early life. His father was a teacher and superintendent at Harley Institute in Tishomingo, where Charles attended before he went to Austin College in Texas. After college, he worked on a cattle ranch in Old Mill Creek and later gained experience in the business world.
And he became a clerk, and he weighed cotton, and he became a cotton buyer. And I think probably the fact that he was a cotton buyer, he got to meet a lot of people and negotiate, and which served him well in his later life, the negotiation process and learning how people were and how to deal with them and get along with them.
Charles Carter was a superintendent of schools, an auditor for the Chickasaw Nation, worked in banking, and owned a hotel in Ardmore with his father. He was elected to the Chickasaw legislature in 1894 before serving as secretary of the Building Commission. During the time, Chickasaw Governor Robert Harris was working to construct the Chickasaw Capitol. In November 1898, he was appointed by President William McKinley as mineral trustee for the Chickasaw and Choctaw Nations. He continued moving toward a role in national politics.
Those were the big things back in those days, and so that's probably what gave him the impetus to get into politics.
Charlie's reputation in Ardmore was quite good, obviously, because when the statehood rolled around, he became part of the secretarial development for the Democrat Party in the state convention, and Alfalfa Bill Murray was very much involved in all that. So Charlie was kind of rising in the ranks there, in a sense, and becoming very active politically.
When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, Charles Carter was poised to begin a 20-year career representing the people of Oklahoma in Washington, D.C., a career that wouldn't end until 1927.
Just right out of the bag, here we have a Chickasaw citizen elected to the U.S. Congress.
So he served a long time in Congress, and through the First World War, was a very significant person in Washington, D.C.
Carter's popularity expanded beyond his constituents back home. He had widespread popularity in the nation's capital and became chair of the Committee on Indian Affairs, where he could assert his voice on behalf of all Native Americans.
But I think one thing about him, he was well prepared educationally, and he had good business background. He had good leadership skills, which he had already exhibited in the 1890s and early 1900s.
Everything that he did was honorable. He was respected by people, as attested by the fact that there was hardly any other Native Americans that were elected during that time.
He twice headed up the Indian Affairs Committee and carried the legislation that gave all Native Americans finally in 1924 the right to vote, something that we had in Oklahoma, but most Native Americans did not.
Charlie was very, very strong in helping to bring about an act in 1924 that granted citizenship. Across the United States, there were groups and pockets of Indians that were not citizens or had not been treated just the same way as our folks had been here.
The 5 tribes were considered citizens when they accepted their allotments. They became citizens of the United States, but a lot of other Native Americans weren't.
And Charles Carter raised his voice on their behalf.
Even though they were citizens, a lot of the people in Washington really didn't consider them as first-class citizens. So yes, Native Americans definitely needed a voice up there, and Charles D. Carter was a voice, not only for Chickasaws, but for all Native Americans.
He made his mark. He was able to win 10 terms right off the bat, and he did some very significant things.
He sponsored key legislation that helped protect Indian land rights after allotment.
Some of the people for the state of Oklahoma wanted them to be able to sell their property so they could tax the property. But Charles D. Carter, with the help of Douglas Johnson, Alfalfa Bill Murray, Palmer Mosley, and William Guy, all supported legislation that would protect some of the restrictions that were allowed for the Chickasaws so that they wouldn't be forced to sell their land or influenced to sell their land and then put on the tax rolls. They were able to retain those restrictions and keep it tax exempt for quite some time.
Although by most accounts Carter was soft-spoken, there is evidence he was no pushover, both in Congress and in life. The New York Times wrote of an incident where Carter took on 4 men single-handedly to defend his daughter's honor on a shopping excursion in Washington.
Charlie was with the girls up there, and he perceived that one of the clerks in the store where they were had insulted his daughter, Italy.
And did not realize his her father and was pretty saucy and evidently made a pass. Well, Congressman Carter decked the guy. And then 3 other clerks jumped him, and he evidently carried a cane. As the newspaper accounts, this was like first front page newspaper in Washington Post, New York, he beat them into bloody submission.
They said he thrashed them. He thrashed 3 or 4 people. So he must have had a streak in him then where he could stand his ground.
Legends live beyond one's time on Earth, and the Carter family name lives on in southern Oklahoma's Carter County.
His name is good. It's still a very good name in the area. And I think that's quite a legacy to leave.
I think he showed what we were capable of doing in a way that really probably surprised a lot of people. I mean, if you remember, of course, in the early 20th century, Native Americans were supposed to be a vanishing race, and obviously our own tribe was going through a great deal of difficulty with the Dawes Commission and the division of our lands, the allotment process, frankly, all of the theft and all of the swindling that went on in connection with that. But he showed you could still be Chickasaw and succeed at the very highest levels of national politics.
It's interesting that we're looking back 100 years to a fellow who served in the U.S. Congress and was helping Indian people in Oklahoma and other places to transition into the citizenship of the United States as a whole.
Charles Carter's experience in education, business, and politics all contributed to a career of dedicated service, not only to Chickasaw people, but to all Native Americans.
I think it was his willingness to go up and spend 20 years really fighting in a time that was really, really hard on the transition of not just our tribe, but all the tribes. And I think that's a very, very important message that we can come away with.
He was very famous, and he was an influential guy and believed in fighting for causes that weren't always popular and for standing up, again, for all Native Americans, making a statement, hey, we're Americans, we're the first Americans, we have every right to be here and to participate in these institutions, and we intend to do it. He was one of the very first, and he wasn't just a token. He was there and rose to the top levels of leadership within his own party and within the Congress of the United States. So what a consequential figure, what a terrific role model for our people, and honestly for Native Americans everywhere.
Charles Carter died in 1929 at the age of 60 in his hometown of Ardmore, Oklahoma, where the Carter name continues to be a reminder of the contributions of this Chickasaw leader and legacy.